So today I'll have the pleasure to give a short keynote on how to address scalability and granularity challenges for manufacturing with complex supply chains. Very welcome to that. So first, I want all of us to align on a definition for eco-design, because there, as you all might know, many definitions out there. And to say eco-design, that's something very easy, but actually it's a complex construct. And for that session, eco-design is an integration of environmental aspects into the product development process. You consider environmental aspects in all stages of the product development process. You strive for products which have the lowest possible environmental impact throughout the product life cycle. Environmental impact, though, that could be everything and not everything, as you all also might know. Eco-design is the design of usage context in product design, and it is the design of action and life process in communication design. So the designer more or less becomes, or the design itself becomes, a mediator between consumer, environment, and economy. And it's actually the one thing where you can change the most. You all might be aware that there is the ESPR. There is already an ESPR existing. That's the Ecodesign for Sustainable Products Regulation, and there has been published a new proposal, which is really very interesting because it actually extends the scope of what eco-design is in a regulatory regulatory space. It adds things as product durability, reusability, presence of substances, recycled content, remanufacturing, recycling, the carbon and environmental footprint, and also other information requirements. So suddenly, not just from not just from how you actually define eco-design, suddenly also from a regulatory space, eco-design is getting blown up. So what we see is that we have identified 4 challenges to actually meet all the requirements which are in the proposal for the new eco-design regulation. The first challenge is there are so many stakeholders you have to please. Basically, there is the regulatory piece and the NGO piece, which I put in one basket. So you have to report on some stuff. NGOs want to see some certain reports on certain pieces of regarding your product. You have the customers and the suppliers who actually also want to have certain aspects seen in the product they buy from you. You have the market who has its own rules, and you also have internal stakeholders. They also have a perception on what they see as an eco-design product, right? So that is the first big challenge, to actually please all the different stakeholders you will have which are meeting your product. The next challenge out there is actually that there are so many different subjects you have to answer to. Everyone will have heard of CSRD, which is a very complex reporting system, which will be which you will be in charge if you're a bigger company from next year on. There are several aspects in the supply chain, also regulatory aspects which are coming up in that regards. Some customers of you want to have an LCA. You have product carbon footprints you have to deliver in each and every corner of the company and also outside. There is the aspect of material compliance, which has to be done and checked. If you have sites outside of Europe, you also will have to answer to CBAM. There is still the cost aspect, which is driving products the most, right? Some will want to have an EPD. You have to answer to CSDDD. So there are so many regulatory and other aspects out there. And one of the most stressing thing is you have to somehow be able to answer them all. And if you have many products and very complex supply chains, that is actually a struggle. So there is the question how to somehow automate that, right? So that is more or less the second bigger basket of challenges. Then we have the third challenge for answering all the you know, all the different demands. And that is for sure the internal structure. I mean, every company out there is set up in a different way, and you have a different way on how they communicate and how they work together. Certainly the product is somehow in the middle, but how every department is answering to the product and working with that product is different from company to company. And depending on the setup you have in the company right now, it makes it harder or easier to answer all the aspects. And it also makes it harder or easier to answer, to actually cooperate within the company, right? With all the aspects you have to answer, but which we had in the first two buckets, it's actually not so easy. You have to start, some departments have to start to work together which haven't worked together before, and they have to agree on aspects which they haven't had to agree before on that, which makes some sort of transformation. There's some need for transformation and the need for communication in new communication lines, right? And of course, you also will have experts and consultancies that can be internal and external, but they are always an important part to somehow answer the external demand on eco-design. The last and fourth bucket, which is a challenge, or can be a challenge, and of course these are all intertwined, right? But nevertheless, it's a challenge for itself, is the data landscape. So the question is, how can you put all the data together in an AAA manner, like automated, auditable, and accelerated? How do you get a valid output? You need different data sources. The data are usually in various systems. So I am working in sustainability consulting and engineering in that area since more than 50 years, and I haven't yet seen one company who had all necessary data in one system. So that is for sure one of the challenges. Where are all the data hidden? The data are usually owned by different business lines and people. Not everyone has access to the necessary data, meaning that you also have to somehow gather that aspect. And usually there is also a wide range of different software tools for the same data type in different sites. So it can happen that, for example, you collect energy data and waste data for your production sites on a various different software tools, just because it happened naturally over the history of the company. And the last thing, which also is one of the challenges I see, or we see companies facing, is that the data are not available in electronic form. So there are various challenges to actually enable the company to answer to the outside expectations and enable eco-design in an automated manner. Yeah, I guess you have found yourself in at least 1, 2, 3 of the points I have mentioned in the presentation so far. So we at MakerSite have actually seen all these challenges, right? And we have found a way how we solve it, and that's something I want to, you know, show to you. So our approach is that we said, okay, we have to find a way to bring together all the data of a company and map these to all the needed other databases, life cycle databases, chemical databases, compliance databases, you name it, right? And they have to somehow be mixed and matched up in a way that matters, and so that still the company recognizes their own data, right? We have done that, and that is something where AI comes in, machine learning and certain algorithms, in a way so that you have it put together in a way that you can put out all the different insights, reports, analysis you need to actually drive eco-design, to understand your supply chain, to answer all the requests you might get with one model. So no need to have thousands of different Excel files, thousands of different tools, and a lot of different people to put together the data, which is always something which is not so easy to manage. There are many mistakes which can happen. And if the tools cannot communicate to each other, there's also a loss of information in between. So our solution to that problem was, if you have one model that serves them all, right, you don't lose any information, and it's also easy to get into the gaps. So with that approach, what we have found is that you actually can solve a lot of the challenges I have mentioned before. For the data landscape, you actually build up a digital twin for the data you have in your company that provides you with a clear overview of where your strengths are data-wise, where your weak spots are, and where your actual gaps are, right? For the internal structure, it provides you with one platform where you can identify your internal stakeholders. You can invite them to work on the same platform. That makes communication much faster and much smarter. You don't have to have new communication lines and new rules set up so that everyone can use that tool and the other tool. Actually, it's all summarized in one tool, and you work together in that one by using the actual data, right? You can, stakeholder-wise, you can satisfy the needs of internal and external stakeholders in real time, and you can even include the supplier information. So you are building up your own supply chain information. And topic-wise, it's easy because you have used one model, so that one model can serve all the different purposes. It's real time. You can be upfront new developments because everything is already calculated. It's auditable, and it's easy to maintain because it's using your actual real data. So that was our approach on how to solve the challenges for Ecodesign. And I think that AI in general, so that is of course our approach on how to solve the problem. There are others out in the market, but just to say, I think for very complex products with a lot of different stakeholders and a lot of very complex supply chain, I think the only way is something similar to that, where you have where you have the help of, as I said, AI and machine learning to help you to put it together in one model, right? That has to be the future. Otherwise, I don't see how to solve all the problems in a way that actually doesn't bring you in a lot of trouble if I see all the upcoming regulations. So that was my keynote to the discussion, and I'm looking forward to the panel. Thank you.
Fantastic stuff. Sophie, thank you very much indeed. I've been scribbling down frantically as you've been going through those slides, yeah. And I've certainly got a few questions. And just again, out to our audience, as you've got questions, if you've got questions specifically for Sophie, you want to expand on anything from those slides there, of course, we will be sharing today's slides after the showcase as well. But please do give a virtual raise of the hand, drop a DM. You can also drop into the Q&A navigation in the bottom nav there as well to ask questions. Myself and Adam, my technical operator here, will bring you up on screen to ask your question to Sophie, and indeed a bit further later down the line, our panel as well. Sophie, while we're lining up some audience questions, a few from my side. I mean, first of all, great scenario, and I'm sure, what was that, six, 7 slides that seemed so simple and succinct, probably had quite a few hours of head scratching and working out the best way to get that information down and right. Talk us through what you were considering when you were building out those different scenarios and thinking about how, what are the common challenges there and how to actually present that in a simple yet strength defining way around those challenges for those different companies, certainly those dealing with such complex supply chains.
Yeah, I mean, it's all experience, right? We see that in the daily manner on what the main challenges are. I have been working in that sector like for many years now. So basically, if you do that for many years, it's not that much of a head scratching anymore. It's more of a, how can we solve the problems, because the problems are the same. I mean, it's the same problem, but if they're different, in a different color maybe, right? As I said, every company has a different setup, but the problem in itself is the same. So the actual question was more at a certain point of time, like, how can that be solved, right? How can you somehow make out of all these challenges a solution which kills them all and makes it better. And I have presented you our approach of how you do that, right? But I guess there's a lot of discussion potential on that approach as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let alone the multiple variables. I mean, what was it? Challenge 3, the internal structure. Let's take that as one example. Million different internal structures for a million different businesses. Yeah, let alone the external dynamics and relationships they hold with the suppliers, and not even getting into their more complex supply chains outside of that. So that being said, when in your experience, how difficult is it for manufacturers and companies to truly understand their current data when they're getting started? You've got to be able to see your unknown unknowns, I suppose, is quite a difficult thing to do. So, how difficult is that? And is there any advice that you can offer companies that are going and taking those first steps on their journey?
So if there are 2 aspects to it. So from an historic point of my view, I would say it was quite different to get a hand on the data and put them together in a meaningful way. Just to produce an LCA, it's already a trouble because you have the data which are internally, but you have to merge them and somehow change them to actually make something out of it so that you can use it for should costing or for the life cycle assessment or for compliance. You have different requirements for that all. So, and to make that in an accelerated, big scope, that's hard. That means a lot of man hours. Okay, so a lot of, and that's the exciting thing of what we have done by somehow merging that automatically. Right, you get such a pretty nice overview of what you have and where your gaps are. That is actually no problem anymore. That's the exciting thing on what we have done so far, right? I would say with the approach we have chosen, what we have seen with the companies we're working with is that they are excited, to understand that they actually probably have more data than they expected to have, right? Because we are using every bit and piece you might find, which you might not yet have thought of that it might be relevant, right? So we are using everything and make the best out of it. And from there, it's then easy to understand where the gaps are, right? Because if you are aware of what your actual data, let's put it mass, can actually do, right? From there, it's easy to build up a strategy on that and say, okay, that's where we are. That's our status quo. And now let's go forward further, right? Mm-hmm. As I said, it's a massive amount of data you're working with, right? And I don't think that there is a way to do that without some sort of machine learning or AI because of that massive amount of data, right? We're talking for complex manufacturers. If you're working with bill of materials, it's a 2,000 line bill of material is nothing. And now multiply that with 20,000 products, and then what massive amount of data. And then you just have to go back, right? There is a lot of other data behind these stuff with energy, waste, and so on and so forth, compliance data. So we're talking about a lot of different data points at that point. Yeah.
Absolutely. Don't ask me to do the maths on that because I couldn't give you an answer. But certainly, and actually, I'm what I'm not going to do is get us down a rabbit hole of AI specifics here. But certainly, when you look at the sheer magnitude and volume of data there, structured data, unstructured data, ever changing, you start moving into things like neural network patterns that you can work with unstructured data, and how that translates back into the life, or the modeling of digital twin, and seeing how those have interplay there. I suppose once a company has gone down and as you said, is I'm oversimplifying here, but got to that point very quickly, which we know it wouldn't be, to understand their current data and the potential of that current data. And also, again, as you say, to have probably grasped data that they didn't know they had or didn't know they had access to, and how that starts to play into their modeling. Once that data is understood in sustainability terms, how can companies, manufacturers look to optimize their data sources, whether that's internally or externally, to start to unlock faster, stronger decision making?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk now about the definition of environmental sustainability a lot here, right? But if we're talking about what is actually the stuff companies need at the moment, that's aspects like product carbon footprint, life cycle assessment results, circular economy aspects, stuff like that. Okay. So when usually the data which you have are usually enough to produce a valid life cycle assessment result or product carbon footprint result. The good thing is if you're actually using every bit and piece of data you have available and not cut it off because you have to fit in some system, but you have your digital twin, and that's why you're not cutting off any data flow, right? The only you will recognize very quickly that it's actually at the suppliers where you have to fill in data. So basically from tier 1 upstream and then downstream after your product is in the market. That's where you actually have the gaps most of the time. And that is where you have to start to communicate with suppliers. Also, again, something which you should drive with some sort of system, right? Some sort of IT system. We incorporate that automatically, because that's where you get more specific, and that's where you understand, okay, where actually are my, not the low-hanging fruits, because the low-hanging fruits, that's something a lot of companies already have identified, but where are the next fruits I can reach without spending millions of dollars, right? And where in my supply chain do I have to reach out first to actually, get to that place?
Mm-hmm. And those mid-hanging fruits are going to be different for every company. But are there any? Do you tend, in your experience and from your perspective, are there any more common mid-hanging fruits that companies tend to go after, or that you perhaps would recommend as opportunities?
I think that is very much depending on what company we're talking about, right? It's
Sure.
a big difference between someone with agricultural pre-products or someone with the steel and aluminum and stuff like that in the product. So I would say the good thing is if you have an overview over your data, you can actually find the suppliers which matter the most, and you don't have to interact blindly. I have seen that with a lot of companies, that they are very market driven. So they have suppliers, not suppliers, sorry, they have customers or a certain niche which demands something urgently. So everything is concentrating on that part of the portfolio, and the view is like limited to that view. And if you start to limit yourself, right, it's hard to actually do a strategy on your whole portfolio or something which is long term and valid for long term on a long term perspective. So that's why I say, if you want to be ahead of the game and not just driven by the external things which are out there, right? It's good if you have an overview. And coming back to that, so I think one of the biggest things you will see very soon and immediate is what suppliers you have to go first, and you can start to actually build up a range of where you start, what's the next block and what's the last block, right? Who matters the most, where you have to interact the first to actually do it on a strategic level, and not on that market driven thing. I mean, you always will have that, but somehow with all that stuff coming, you have to be ahead of the game, right? The worst thing which can happen to you is that you're always one step back of the game. Yeah. That is killing every business, because you're guiding the money in directions where you don't want them to be, because it will not help your business to sustain.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I suppose to that point with the suppliers as well, and creating that priority list of who, when, and why. I mean, even within exactly. there, there's countless variables. Do you start with those mid-value suppliers that are high complexity and important relationships, high-value suppliers that are simple to get through and bring on board, and there's so many variables within that, which actually brings us on nicely to another question that I had. But before I do, just another quick one out to our audience as well. I know Adam is in our chat at the moment, getting you all up to speed and how to ask questions. Please do feel free to ask Sophie, our keynote, any questions over the next kind of 10 minutes or so. And also we have another audience Q&A coming up after our panel. But Sophie, back to our point around And I'm going to move us away
Can I
somewhat. Of course,
sorry, I just had something in mind. Coming
Yeah.
back to eco-design, you also don't want to eco-design just for the purpose of eco-designing so that your customer is happy. I mean, of course, you want that your customer is happy, right? But on the other hand, you also want to eco-design to reach your goals. If you have a strategy, you usually everything, all the directives out there, they demand to have goals. There are SBTIs, and I didn't name them all on my slide, obviously, because they're just a lot. So you want to reach goals. If you don't have an overview, you can't concentrate on the bits and pieces which are actually valuable. So if you see that this part of your portfolio is actually the one which is the most important from your from the company perspective, you want to concentrate on that piece and bit and piece, and guide your money into that and do the eco design on these product, right? And not just the ones where sales is screaming the loudest and saying, hey, we need that one because our customer needs that. You have to serve that as well, obviously, but nevertheless you have to work on the other thing as well. And if you think of how much time it costs right now, I mean, there are already half automated tools for some of the aspects out there, right? But nevertheless, if you think of, if you are doing eco design at the moment and you want to do it properly, right, not just on one aspect, then you have to have an expert internally. You have to understand your costs. You have to understand the procurement. You have to talk to the designers. The designers have to find other alternatives that has to be fed back because they also have to do their calculations. And that's a process which takes months for one product, right? Just imagine if you could do that in just one day, right? That is time and money savings.
Yeah, let alone then multiplied by the number of products you have, and then the magnified efficiencies from there. As well. And actually, before we do move on, I really like that AAA, automated, auditable, accelerated as well. Definitely stealing that with your credit, of course, there, Sophie. But again, it actually seems we're talking around the sheer volume of compliance, regulatory bodies, regulations, cost was in there as well on that slide. Clearly needing to automate to be able to handle all of those within that complexity as well. My question around that is how does that AAA manner manifest itself in reality? Does it start with automation? Are they truly balanced in that kind of blend of what a company needs, and it needs automation, but it needs to be accelerated and it needs to be fully auditable? I was going to try and be clever and add accountability into that, but I think that's probably under the umbrella of auditable. With that automation piece, how important is that above and beyond what we already know? But perhaps more importantly, what have you seen to be some of the really big success stories or efficiencies for companies that have really grasped that ability to automate at scale within such complex environments? Yeah,
it takes away a lot of pressure. It takes away a lot of pressure if you can actually automate, accelerate, and audit the data and the whole model and get different outputs. Actually, that makes your life so much easier. And just from all your experts, all your people are actually free to do their actual work, right? You don't spend time on figuring out how to model that, how to do an LCA for that product, how to, the whole project management which is behind. Suddenly it just is like, duck. It's there. You don't have to worry for that anymore. And that alone, that thing that brings you a lot of freedom in actually, taking next steps which are valuable and accountable and where you can stand behind, right? Because the worst thing which can happen, and that might not fit to anyone in the audience, but I have seen it already, is that you have to do something for a customer, obviously customer driven, right? But then another customer asks for a strategy, and suddenly because that was the only thing you concentrated on because you didn't have more time, more people, right? Or you just missed it, could be as well. And suddenly you have to merge that piece into some sort of strategy and say, that's what you have done, that is your strategy, right? And in the light of that new greenwashing directive, which is also out there, that is the worst thing. You want to avoid that, right?
Yeah, at all costs. So actually, let's move away from the AAA and data for a second, and actually to those things behind the data, us people. When it comes to fostering better teamwork, to engaging workforce, employees, collaboration behind those strategies, what are some of the key ingredients to help fostering better teamwork there, Sophie? What have you seen work well to help elevate sustainability strategies from the human and people perspective?
I mean, that almost gets philosophical, but on a very clear base. I think there was a saying I have once read that somewhere, that a sustainability manager or head of sustainability actually not just has to be good in the field of the, like, has to have expertise, but actually he also has to be a good, people's manager, and has to be able to, make people want to do something, bring them on the same path, educate them, which is an own thing where you have to be good at. So it's hard to be both at the same time. But actually, I think it all comes down, I mean, there are many different things and you can read them all up, but how to motivate people and how to engage people and how to bring them on that journey to eco-design, right? But I would actually say in the end, it's all about educating all the stakeholders you have, meaning internally, externally, and also, of course, also in regards of regulatory bodies, because somehow your market or your product has to be understood also from everyone you're talking to. So I guess that is a bit then it's a bit of me answering to a very complex question with a very obvious answer, but in the end it comes down to that.
Stuff. And hold my hands up, Sophie, I appreciate that was a very deep and philosophical question, and we could do an entire showcase just probably on that one question. But I suppose my point in asking it was, there are people behind our screens and data and AI that are still at the crux, and important that we can enable their decision making.
Yes.
In part as well. Incredibly.
And that's why that's what I meant before, right? If you enable people to work with all the data which are available, and you don't hinder them by structures or by you can't access that data, or you need 5 people to get to the data, and if you just take that away, you already free up people to actually do their job. That makes it much easier for them. That's what I meant by, if you have one data model, everyone is working with that. These barriers are gone, right? So from that perspective, I think that's one of the aspects which really help in working together.